responsible for property speculation.
Call Andrew Bailey.
I move that the question be now put.
I call the Honourable David Cunliffe.
Thank you, Mr Chairman.
Very good decision, Mr. Chairman.
Mr Chairman, this budget has been labelled by the government as the compassionate Conservative budget. These clauses 20 and 21 of this bill, show that it's a Cabinet Club Conservative budget because they are taking a public service housing provider, ripping the guts out of it, and in Part 2 of this bill, sir, removing from it even the ability to advise the Minister on policy issues. Here's how. Clause 20 says the Department will give no policy advice. Clause 21 says when it does research, that research will not be on policy issues. In other words, no non-commercial function will be performed by Housing New Zealand. Housing New Zealand is going from being a provider of houses to vulnerable families who need help to essentially a commercial landlord. Let us look, sir, at what would be some of the advantages of an agency like Housing New Zealand continuing to be empowered to give policy advice. The first is, as my colleague Annette King has mentioned, they have history. They have managed the portfolio for decades. They know literally where the renovations and the skeletons are buried, and they know what needs doing. There is nobody better placed than the organisation to advise on its portfolio and the needs therein. Secondly, up until recent times, the corporation had the most contact with its clients. If you had a problem of maintenance or a problem of prioritisation, you'd go and see the corporation. Because they had the stock and the client contact, they were best placed to put the two together, come up with a reasonable set of priorities and get the families that most needed the help in the properties that were most suitable for them. So the government has made that more difficult because instead of going to Housing New Zealand now, the poor families have to go to MSD, the Ministry of Social Development, or WINS as it's often termed. They are already overloaded. They are slapping and packing people through those waiting lists every 5 minutes, and those are the performance indicators that the poor old WINS staff are under. They have to move them through. They don't have the expertise or the time to deal with these critical issues of where are a family going to live. So the next thing is, of course, Housing New Zealand's got a local footprint. They've got houses in each area of the country, sir. They know their stock, they know the communities that they're in. Why wouldn't you want the corporation advising on policy issues? And of course, if you're not going to have that, what happens? Well, the first thing is you don't have contestable policy advice. The government makes itself more vulnerable, sir, to input from the vested commercial interests, the banks that are making a crazy killing off house mortgages, the property investors and the organisations that represent them. And even the social service providers like the Salvation Army who've said, no thanks, we don't want to play this game because you're giving us the liability without the assets. We can't cover it, so they can't get decent advice from them. Let's sum up. By taking away the Policy Functions Minister, you have made clients more vulnerable. You aren't getting the advice that you need to get from the people best placed to give it, who have the history in the organisation, who are close to the clients, who have the deep knowledge of the housing stock that's being managed, and who do not have vested interests that are in conflict with the public good. So there is no basis in logic for the clauses that we are debating in Part 2. Why are they there? And more importantly, why are we here in urgency, trying to pass this through all stages without even giving the public the opportunity to make a submission, sir? Been 4 years in the waiting. Why is this happening in urgency? And the reason, sir, is because the government knows that reasonable New Zealanders don't like this stuff. They don't like this stuff, and so the sooner this is wrapped and packed and under the carpet and out of the public gaze, the happier the government's spin doctors will be. They don't want to hear from New Zealanders. They don't want New Zealanders having a say because they know that the average decent Kiwi thinks it's a no-brainer that, of course, Housing New Zealand should be able to advise on housing issues. Why on earth wouldn't they? Why are these clauses in the bill? Firstly, Minister, if you're really honest in your heart of hearts, it's because you don't want to hear the advice. because it's not good advice, because the news is all bad. The waiting list is getting longer and longer. The needs are getting greater and greater. And just like Chris Hipkins and Annette King and Ruth Dyson and Damien O'Connor, my office is overflowing with hard-up Kiwi families who need the help.
Scott Simpson.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chairman.
I call Scott Simpson.